Okay, today we're going to talk about your yard grading and drainage and things you should expect to see once we get your yard landscaped, or if your yard is already landscaped. And just things you should expect as the year goes through, as your yard matures, how you're going to have to change the watering, and again, what you should expect to see in your yard. So the first thing we're going to do is just run through a little sheet here, and it's our 10 laws of grading and drainage. So we're going to run through this real quick, and then we'll head outside and look at some stuff. So number one here is when we get your yard in, initially, we're going to have your sprinklers going a lot. And that's just necessary to keep your grass alive. So when your sod is new, it requires frequent watering. Some of these are going to seem real obvious, but every year we get questions about this, so we just thought it'd be helpful to run through it. Number two here, this frequent watering that's necessary to keep your yard alive at the beginning is going to make your yard soggy, and as a result, the ground's going to be soft. And as a result, this makes it difficult to do yard maintenance like mowing without sinking in and creating some depressions. So you're just going to need to, number four here, use some care when you're getting ready to mow your yard or do any kind of yard maintenance. A good idea, number five here, would be to shut off your sprinkler system, your irrigation system, for maybe 2 days before you go out to do any yard maintenance, particularly the mowing. This is going to allow the ground to firm up so that when you're walking around you don't create as many footprints. Number six here, let's see, once your new lawn is in, you got to plan on adjusting the irrigation controller or the sprinkler clock probably within about the first 2 weeks, and what you're going to typically do is start cutting back on the amount of time. And after 2 or 3 weeks, you got to pay more attention to just simply how your yard is performing, and less attention to what any expert may have told you about how often your yard should be watered. If after that first 2 weeks or so your yard is staying good and green, but it's overly wet and soggy and you're getting a lot of runoff, water running off the yard, down the alley, down the street, across sidewalks, you just want to start cutting back. You don't want to cut back from 7 days a week to 1 day a week, all in 1 week. But you might cut back from 7 days to going 3 times a day to 7 days twice a day, and then cut out a couple of days and cut back on your time. You just got to sort of play it by ear. This really seems obvious, but every year we get questions about why is all the water sitting in the lower corner of the yard? And obviously water flows downhill. That's an important one to remember. And if when you're watering, the water's flowing off your lot, down the alley, or down the street, or across sidewalks, that doesn't indicate that there's a defect with your grading or drainage. That's just grading or drainage doing what it's supposed to do. The water's going to flow to the lowest spot and come to alleys and sidewalks, and it's going to flow over those. And if you're getting a whole lot of that, that's just an indication you need to cut back on the amount that you're watering. And because of number 8 above, water flows downhill, you're typically going to find that the lower corner, the lower side of your yard is going to be the wettest, and that's just pretty typical. So we're going to head outside and we're going to actually take a look at some things to see in the yard. So we'll cut here, we'll head outside. So we're outside now, standing in the backyard of one of our models out at Stapleton. I'm standing in the low corner, the downhill corner of this yard, looking towards the high side. The high side is up by the patio, and we've got an area of sod out here that we're taking a look at that's bordered by an area of mulch going up to the patio up there. And typically your yard's going to have something similar to this, with an area of sod bordered by mulch. And so when we're watering this area, especially when it's new, we're putting a lot of water on it. We're probably watering 2 or 3 times a day, every day of the week. And so all the excess water is, by gravity and the water flows downhill rule, is going to run over towards this side and down towards this corner where we're standing. And so in the end, this side over here along the fence, and the sidewalk is outside the fence here, and this end where we're standing is just going to be the wettest area. And there's really no way around that. That's just going to happen, and so you kind of got to expect that you're going to see that, especially initially when we're watering your yard a lot. Then as you start cutting back, and you go throughout the rest of the season, ultimately the yard will dry up and get to where you're only watering just what's needed, and following Denver's water restrictions, which I think ultimately is going to be 2 times a week that you're able to water. And you're going to find that your yard dries out, firms up, and all looks good. But you're just going to have to expect that initially it's going to be relatively soggy, it's going to be kind of soft, and the low side is where the extra water is going to go and even collect to some point. We typically find that the water flows relatively good through the sod, but slows down quite a bit when it gets into the mulch area, and then it would flow through the mulch out to the sidewalk and alley that's on the other side of this fence here. But it definitely slows down going through the mulch, so it wouldn't be uncommon to, especially when your yard is new, to see this mulch be wet and stay wet for quite a period of time. And you just kind of got to have patience until you start reaching a point where you're cutting back enough that you don't get that collection of water. Some houses, the yards aren't going to have quite as severe of a slope as this, and the water will actually flow relatively slowly through the sod as well. But again, once again, when you cut back, once your yard gets more established, we typically see all those drainage concerns just go away, despite the fact that we really don't alter the grade any once somebody's in, except on very rare occasions. So we're going to go take a look at some of the planter areas as well, where we've got some shrubs and whatnot that get watered by the drip system, and those are out front, and some of the things you should expect relative to that. So we're going to stop here and head out front. So now we're out front of our model here, taking a look at the landscaping and the grading and the drainage. So out here on this one, the high side is up by the house, and it slopes down towards the sidewalk in front of the house here. I've got a number of plants and grasses in this area that are going to get watered by the drip system, and particularly when the landscaping is new, we'll have the drip system going fairly frequently. And what you're going to get is a little extra water in order to keep the new plants alive, and any extra water is going to flow down this slope to the sidewalk. And so it'd be pretty common to get a little bit of collection of water down here along the sidewalk in a corner like this, and then it's going to flow across the sidewalk and over to the tree lawn over here. And that's just going to be a pretty typical experience, something you should pretty much count on happening. And then ultimately, over time, you'll cut back on how much water you're giving all these plants, and you'll get far, far less of that. One of the things that typically happens in these corners is that they actually leave the dirt down a little bit below the level of the sidewalk in order that it can hold the mulch in. So there's a little bit of a lip right there, and the water is going to pool in that corner until it gets to the top of the concrete to flow over. So to get a little bit of puddling in corners like that, or anywhere along this edge, would be really typical, something you should expect to happen. And again, once you've cut back, when your landscaping gets more mature, that tends to stop happening. Another thing we see happen a lot is in the tree lawns. Again, when they're new, we'll be watering the tree lawn a lot, and you're going to find that they're going to be soggy and that they're going to be soft, and you're going to get a little bit of collection of water. But once we've cut back, all of that goes away once your yard gets more mature. The slope that we can create on a tree lawn is pretty much defined. It's defined by the edge over here, the sidewalk. It's defined by the curb over here, and just the slope of the street. We can't make it any steeper or more steep than those elements require. So tree lawns are always pretty darn flat. And initially we'll have a lot of people say it just seems like it's too flat, too wet, and all of those tend to go away the next year when the yards are more mature and everybody has cut back how much they're watering. So again, you kind of got to plan on that. And not to say that if you've got a really wet tree lawn that we couldn't come out and take a look at it, but a lot of times there's really no defect. It's just a matter of being patient and wait until the sod gets a little more established and everybody's cutting back on their watering. The direction I'm looking on this particular tree lawn right here, it all slopes towards me. It's a very subtle slope. It's probably less than 2%, but it all slopes towards me. So if everybody going up this street was watering the tree lawn more than it needed, ultimately a good chunk of that excess water is going to ooze its way down this tree lawn and end up down at this end. And whoever lives on this end is going to be the wettest of all. And until everybody cuts back and their yards get more mature and established, that's just going to happen. So we're going to take a look at a couple other things real quick here, and then we'll finish up. So a lot of times we'll hear people be concerned that their yard doesn't have enough slope or enough grade to it, and that's why they're getting extra water, or why they think that their yard is wetter or soggier than it should be. And usually it's not that. It's just that the yard's new and I'm putting a lot of water on it. As an example, we're standing out in the middle of Central Park here, and Stapleton is able to water an area like this, which is very flat and very big, and have it not be wet. And how do they do that? They do that by putting an appropriate amount of water on it, because it's well mature and it doesn't need that extra water. For certain, when this area was new and they were watering it a bunch, it was very wet and they had extra runoff. But at this point in time, all this sod's good and mature, and they just water it what it needs, and you don't and even though it's very flat and has very minimal slope, you don't see it having big puddles of water, and you don't see it being real soggy. So we hopped over to another part, just another example of an area that's really flat, doesn't have a whole lot of slope or a whole lot of grade, and yet Stapleton is able to water an area like this and not have it be all soggy. And it's just a result of it being a lot more mature and not needing as much water as a new yard needs. So that finishes up the video on grading and drainage and what you should expect. So if you got any questions about any of that, feel free to shoot us an email at warranty@infinityhomecollection.com. Thanks.